On this Easter morning, I began with something that might sound a bit odd in a Christian church. I began with an Easter observation from a Unitarian preacher, Forrest Church, the longtime minister of All Souls Church on the Upper East Side of New York. I had the pleasure of knowing Forrest in the early 90s when I was a seminary student at Princeton. As a side note, I was always struck by it must be written in the stars that you become a minister if your last name is Church. Okay, I had to do this at the earlier, so that is funny, is it not? This from Forrest. If I were only to come to church once a year, I would almost certainly choose Easter. Easter is a better choice than Christmas. Christmas doesn't have death in it, not at its very center anyway. And if you're going to go to church, church should have death in it. Christmas does have animals and presents and babies and stars. Those are all splendid things, and Christmas has birth. But Easter has death and rebirth. Birth is essential, but for our spiritual journey, death and rebirth are far more consequential. Easter has flowers, of course, but flowers don't really have anything to do with Easter. They have to do with spring. I've nothing against flowers, said Forrest. They are splendid as animals, presents, babies, and stars. But Easter is not about flowers. Flowers are beautiful. They're beautiful for a brief season, and then they languish and die, just like we do. They then cast their seeds to the wind, seeds which crack open, springing new life from the very husk of death. It's a pretty metaphor. There's only one problem with it. We are not flowers. We all know about death. Perhaps it's a place you were deployed or a place of combat. More recently, we know of death in places called Paris or Brussels. But there are other places of death and violence which don't make the news. Places on the Ivory Coast, Palestine, or Gaza, or in the South Sudan. Easter is not about splendid flowers and pretty music. Yes, we do have both this morning. Wonderful, splendid music and beautiful flowers. But Easter is about the real world. Easter is about life and death. Easter is not simply some story that we fondly remember from 2,000 years ago, that we try to figure out if he really did rise from the dead. Easter is about now, our life and death. And Forrest was not using flowery language to talk about life and death. For Forrest lived with and eventually died of esophageal cancer. The great irony, Forrest, well known as a good preacher and orator, could not use his voice. Forrest, while I disagreed with him about much of theology, Forrest was a wonderful preacher, and yet toward the end of his life, had no voice. What an incredible irony. An irony that the prophet Isaiah knew all too well. We heard just a moment ago that dream that Isaiah had. That one day, according to Isaiah's dream, in Jerusalem there shall no more be weeping, there shall be no more crying or the distress of an old person. They shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not bear children for calamity. The resurrection may not be the greatest miracle of Easter. The real miracle may be for the prophet Isaiah's dream to become a reality. Because in 2016, in the real world of Easter, of life and death, is that for many who do live in Israel and in Palestine and in Gaza, this dream of Isaiah's really is a dream. For the nightmare they live in includes a lot of weeping. There are those who've had their houses taken away and they can no longer live in their home. There are many whose children, both Israeli and Palestinian, many on both sides, whose children know nothing but calamity. So here we are this morning, and I guess part of the challenge for the preacher on Easter is some of you might expect that the preacher conduct some kind of science experiment and in a few moments tell you how the resurrection happened. The challenge is there were no recorders, no cameras, no iPhones, and so this makes my task a bit more challenging. I became a Christian, I became a follower of Jesus when I was 10. It had nothing to do with an empty tomb or the resurrection. Nothing at all. I was in vacation Bible school, and all week, and of course growing up in church my whole life, I had heard all the parables, I knew all the gospel stories about Jesus, and then in vacation Bible school I unmistakably heard that question Jesus asked Andrew, Peter, James, John, "Come and follow me. Will you follow me?" I said yes. And I gave my life, gave myself to following this rabbi, this teacher. Had nothing to do with an empty tomb or trying to prove or disprove what happened that Easter morning. I simply heard the call, "Will you come and follow me?" And I said yes. Those stories in the Gospels that we know quite so well have a whole lot to do about sacrificial love. That's what Jesus did, really proving that when he talked about God's kingdom, he was willing to put his money where his mouth was, and he was willing to die for it. Sacrificial love. I'm quite certain that Jesus suffered, thirsted, and felt forsaken in the anguish of his dying hours. I'm equally certain that his followers were devastated when he died. They expected him to live and save them, but the real miracle was that Jesus did not live and save them. Jesus died and saved them. Jesus suffered, wept, forgave, and died. His followers failed, scattered, wept, found forgiveness, and lived, reborn of his death. For him, for Jesus, and for them, even after death, in his love, Jesus lived on. In his life, Jesus lived on. And in his disciples' hearts, he reigned as never before. This from Forrest. The essence of Easter, the real miracle of Easter is transformation, is new life. Jesus was reborn and continued to live in the hearts of his followers. Death was the occasion, love the medium, and forgiveness the catalyst. This, my dear friends, is the essence of Jesus' gospel. We are all children of God. We are all sinners. We all need to be forgiven. We all can be forgiven. Love casts out fear. God is love, and only love remains. And the love we give away. Happy Easter.